Hello, friends. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast. Today we have my good friend Ken Fish joining the program. Ken is the founder of Orbis Ministries, and since 2010, he left his executive job working with Fortune 500 companies to go into full-time ministry, traveling to over 40 countries, working along various churches and equipping leaders to further advance the kingdom of God. But before we begin, we just want to say that our hearts and prayers are with the Armenian people. War has broken out. On Sunday morning, September 27th, Azerbaijani forces backed by the Turkish government attacked the region of Nagorno-Karabakh with tanks, drones, and helicopters, breaking a 26-year-old ceasefire agreement. To our friends in Armenia who are listening, we're praying for peace, and you are with our thoughts and in our hearts. Ken, welcome to the program. It's good to have this conversation and catch up.
Thanks. It's great to be here with you.
The two of us were in Armenia 2 years ago, and you went to Armenia. So what were your thoughts on that trip we had?
Well, I went to Armenia uncharacteristically for me without a quote unquote invitation. I mean, you had said you would happily use your influence to set things up, but normally I don't go places where I haven't been invited. Sometimes preachers just say, well, I'm going to go and do what I'm going to do, but I don't generally follow that pattern. But I really felt nudged. I felt like the Lord was directing me to go to Armenia. And I found it was a wonderful trip, really. I mean, it was fascinating on many levels. It was fascinating because the language is unlike any other language that I know about. It's the only place I've ever gone on ministry where I left without knowing a single word of the language. Usually I'll pick up a few words or phrases. The alphabet doesn't look like our alphabet. It also doesn't look like a Chinese or a Korean or an Indian alphabet. It's a different alphabet. But the food was fantastic. The people were friendly. The history is rich. And the Lord moved really powerfully when we were there, as you know. And I mean, I can't wait to go back again. We had a trip we were going to try and do this year, and for various reasons that didn't work out, including COVID. And then we were talking about early next year, but I think now we're talking about maybe late summer, Northern Hemisphere summer in 2021. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to return.
So Ken, I wasn't there on that trip with you guys, and I'd like to know a little bit from the both of you what you got to see going on there. What was God doing in Armenia, and how did you see him moving there in the region?
Yeah, it was interesting. We met right when you were getting these nudges from the Lord to go, and then you were invited to speak at the church in New York where I serve through Christian Union, through a mutual friend, Matt Bennett. And then we met for breakfast the next day, and you were like, do we want to go to can we go to Armenia? Like, yeah, we can make it happen. And then we eventually went. So that was really interesting how the Lord brought that together. But we went to 20 different churches all throughout the countryside, a couple in Yerevan. I think we prayed for over 500 people. We saw people come to the faith. We saw people get healed. We saw exorcisms, deliverance ministry take place. We saw people get callings into ministry. It was really, it was like one of those trips like that felt like I was in the book of Acts. It was really life-changing for me to see so much of that happen. Usually when you pray for people, nothing really happens, but every person we prayed for, something was happening. It was just amazing to see the Lord do all this and just being obedient to his leadings. So it was very life-changing for me. To just see that in action. And then I come back to New York, and then it's like, all right, this person doesn't believe in God. I need to convince this person if God exists. So it's a very interesting dichotomy of ministry. But what were your thoughts on that trip, Ken? Because you're used to going on these trips.
One of the things that I really took away from that trip, I mean, there were a number of takeaways, but one of the things that comes to mind immediately is the deep and rich history of Christianity in that country. Christianity was legalized in the Roman Empire in the year 313 when Constantine issued the Edict of Toleration. And, the year 313 is a long, long, long time ago. But that was when Christianity was no longer an illegal religion and its followers could be, well, tortured or killed or whatever. But King Tiridates converted to Christianity in 301, which, I mean, at that time, Armenia was a satellite of Rome. It's been a satellite of many empires, I think, through the centuries. But at that time, it was a satellite of Rome. And so for the king to have declared Christianity the religion of his entire kingdom, I think was a rather risky move. And the Romans could have really clamped down on it had they chosen to do so. I think by the year 301, they were quite preoccupied with barbarian invasions in the West and whatnot. And so they didn't really want to expend military resources to put this down. But still, to realize that ancient history, this was literally the first country in the world to embrace Christianity en masse. I'm going to say that again because some of our listeners may not understand that. The king said, we're all going to follow Jesus Christ. And everybody got baptized because what the king says is what you do. And literally the entire nation turned to faith. And you could question the depth of that conversion or the sincerity of it, because we live in a time where at least many of our listeners on this podcast are probably quite individualistic. You know, no one's going to tell me what to believe. I'm going to believe what I want to believe. But in societies that are more tribal or hierarchical, I mean, missiologists and sociologists, anthropologists, they've studied these kinds of mass people movements. They can actually be quite genuine. And so it was remarkable to be in the first land in the world to accept Christianity en masse. And then an entire culture grew up in Armenia that was decidedly and distinctively Christian, unlike the paganism that had been there before Tiridates' conversion. So to me, that was just kind of a mind-blowing thing to be there and realize I'm at ground zero of the first place to become Christian, even before Rome did. But another thing that I took away that was really interesting to me was realizing just how many similarities there are between the persecutions of the Jews and the persecutions of the Armenians. Now, they're not the same people. They have different forefathers of their nations, if you want to put it that way. The Jews famously had Abram and Haik. I guess the first king of Armenia, his name was Haik. But, you know, it's interesting that according to Armenian history, which I think is actually fairly well documented, and I say that because I don't want to make it sound like this is just legend. It's more than legend. This is history. Haik, the first emperor or king of Armenia, whatever his exact title was, that was the role he filled. And now we're way before Tiridates. We're talking like 4,500 years ago or more. But up in the mountains, in the far eastern parts of what is today Turkey, there is a lake, and by that lake is where King Haik used a bow and an arrow to kill a man named Nimrod in battle. And Nimrod is mentioned in the Bible. He was the first empire builder in history. And now, like all empire builders, he did it through invasion and oppression and suppression and pillage and rape and burning. And so Nimrod is mentioned in the Bible as being a mighty man. And he had a kingdom that had 4 major cities as the kind of, you know, anchor points of his empire. And he invaded Armenia, and King Haik repulsed the invasion by killing Nimrod with an arrow. Well, that's rather interesting that, you know, that a man who's named in the Bible that far back, it actually intersects directly with the history of Armenia.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was go for it.
Yeah, go on. I got more to say, but go ahead.
It's interesting. There was a recent genetic linkage to trace Armenia's heritage pretty far back, confirming some of these lofty claims from Moses Koronatsi. It's an interesting New York Times article that was out 5 years ago. Just a genetic linkage to at least support the claim that Armenians trace back genetically that far back, but not necessarily proving the stories, but at least there is this genetic link going back that far.
Right. All right. Well, so, and further to this thing of, you know, King Haik killing Nimrod, I know the Armenians were at one time part of what was called Scythia, which was a wider area. It wasn't only Armenia, but they were known for being famous archers. And in particular, the Romans feared them. The Romans invaded this area during their conquest, but they knew enough to stay well clear of the Armenian and other archers, the Scythian archers. But what's interesting too, what I learned is there, as far as I was able to determine, both from the museums and also other reading I've done since then, I don't believe that there is ever a time that Armenia has fought an offensive war. They've always fought defensive wars. In other words, if they were invaded, they would fight, but they never went on the offense against anybody, which tells me something about the Armenian disposition. They are a peaceable people. And, you mentioned at the very front of the broadcast, the current invasion that's underway by Azerbaijan. And again, Armenia is on the defense and they're fighting back. And it's a terrible thing. But I mean, what do you do when your country is invaded? So in so many ways, I just find the Armenians a fascinating people with a rich spiritual history. And they happen to sit in a very strategic place on the land bridge that comes down out of Asia and goes down between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And I think all of this is significant as well in biblical history, or at least prophetic biblical prophecy, because we have this language in Ezekiel and in Revelation that talks about the Gog and Magog war and the coming of the kings of the East. Well, as it happens, the ancient Silk Road is being rebuilt. And ultimately, if there is going to be some sort of an invasion from the north coming out of what was once called Rosh, now we call it Russia, or Gog and Magog, which, these would be the mountains of Turkey and beyond to the north. And we talk about the coming of the kings of the East. They would need to come in on this newly rebuilt modern superhighway. They're talking about rebuilding the Silk Road. When I was in business, I remember meeting with people who were kind of going on and on about wanting to do that and reconnect from the shores of China on the Pacific all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, that building is nearly complete at this point. And if it should happen that Armenia would capitulate to the Azeris under this current invasion, I mean, it would literally create a biblical situation that could clear the way for the Gog and Magog, Rosh, Tubal, and Meshech war. Meshech is the ancient term for Moscow. I mean, what we don't realize is that this very thing that's going on, we're living in really biblical times if we understand not ancient biblical times, but rather what has been foretold and prophesied in the Bible for centuries. This could literally come together in our time. And so to me, that's just mind-blowing. Of course, we didn't know that when we were there in 2018, that all this might occur. But nevertheless, you have this profound and clear sense of all that has already tried to happen in Armenia. And going back now to the times of Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, they tried to invade through Armenia then. And the Armenians ultimately, in some places, were overrun, but in other places repulsed them. But I think in a strange kind of a way, the Armenians have been some sort of a bulwark protecting that very critical strategic land bridge that comes down out of the north. And I don't think most Westerners have any concept of this, because we kind of live on, mainstream media of whichever channel we like. And it doesn't matter if you like Fox or the New York Times or NBC. But the point is, we kind of live on that, and we don't really have a lot of sensibility about some of these other parts of the world. So to me, it was a very eye-opening thing. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up here, is I was really moved at times when we were there to tears as I traveled through Armenia, realizing that it had once been a Soviet satellite. It had been a Soviet republic. And the Soviets are, gone now. The Soviet empire broke up. And I think it's been, you can correct me on my timeline, but I think it's been in the neighborhood of 30 years since the Soviets withdrew. And yet, everywhere you go, you don't see it so much in Yerevan. Yerevan's gone through its own kind of rebuilding process. But when you get out to the distant areas, the rural areas, the areas that maybe border on what were other countries and Soviet republics, you see still the Soviet architecture. You see, in some cases, literally still sitting there by the side of the road, broken down Soviet vehicles or vessels that were beached on the shores of the, this or that body of water that were maybe used to patrol and enforce. And you see the shabby housing stock that was left behind. You see the gray drabness of a lot of the buildings that they built. And you realize that in a very literal sense of what I'm saying, the Soviets stole the heart and soul of Armenia. They enslaved the people, and they turned them into, well, slaves of the Soviet state. And they used them for their own ends. Stalin gave away 90% of the country to Turkey in an attempt to humiliate the Armenians. And he drained the primary body of water in the whole country to water the crops and fields of southern Russia. And he didn't much care what was left behind. And he was willing to spit out the bones, if you will, or the hull of Armenia when he was all done with it. And when the Soviets withdrew, they left the country poor. And they were not only literally poor, materially poor, monetarily poor, for sure that's all true, but they were spiritually poor because Soviet thinking, communist thinking, socialist thinking is strongly anti-God. And when they left, they had essentially snuffed out much of the vibrant Christian faith that had existed in this land for literally centuries, that had been the heart and soul of the people. And I don't think Armenia has fully recovered from that. I mean, it's improved, I guess. And there are still some monasteries and people who are seminarians. And we met some amazing priests who were filled with faith. And they said, everyone should return to Armenia. We're going to have a great revival here. And it was so encouraging to hear them say this when we went to some of the ancient churches and monasteries. But for the most part, I think the Armenian people are still quite disaffected and alienated from God. And I might even say, a couple of generations have gone by to the point where the faith hasn't really fully, authentically been transmitted to the people. And I just think of what Jesus said in the book of Revelation: strengthen what is weak and about to die. And so I came away with a strong desire. I mean, I'm getting choked up talking about this, but I came away with a strong desire to see the Spirit of God move on this ancient land that was the first ever to embrace Christianity, and to have a great move of God among the Armenian people once again. And I want to go back and be part of it.
Yeah. Thank you for those words, Ken. I appreciate your heart for our people. It's always interesting to talk about these matters because it's always difficult to talk about. Like Armenians have this culture to them where most of them believe in God, but there could be more to that spirituality. Like most Armenians believe in God, but there's so much more to know about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. There's so much resources we have in our ancient history of the great cloud of witnesses from one generation to the next. There's so much potential that's just there. And the more I'm learning about the Armenian history, the more I'm realizing what this resource is, not just for Armenians, but also for other people to learn from and to kind of confirm some things of Scripture and how people outside of that Western lens could see Scripture and see how different things are testifying to the risen Jesus Christ. Ken, you do have undergraduate degree in all this. You went to Princeton University with honors, and you studied late antiquity. What was your focus when you were at Princeton?
I studied the early church fathers from the founding of the church through late antiquity. And I guess it depends on who you're reading, but most scholars would view late antiquity ending sometime around the fall of Rome. It may not be exactly then. Some would say it went a little longer. Some would say it ended before that. But and there's two dates for the fall of Rome. There's 410 and 476, so they're about 2 generations apart. but the more widely recognized date is 476. So I read a lot of the church fathers that were both Eastern Orthodox, as well as the early theologians of the Latin Church in the West. And and then later on, I got a degree from Fuller Theological Seminary in what we might call the history of theology and missions.
And then during that time, you got to work directly with John Wimber, correct?
That's right. I worked with John Wimber at Vineyard Ministries International, and I did that from the early 1980s up until the mid 90s, when my career took me to the East Coast. And it was kind of interesting. The early part of that period, I worked for John as a salaried employee. But the latter part of the period, because I was now, well ensconced in my corporate career, I basically moonlighted. It was unrelated to the professional work I was doing, and so there was no conflict of interest. But I moonlighted and continued writing for John Wimber for 6 more years, producing conferences, sermons, other things like this. And so with all that, I traveled with John. I saw a lot. I learned a lot. And it's an irreplaceable experience. John's not alive anymore, and yet he was one of the more influential thinkers and leaders in the Western Church, Protestantism in particular, in the latter 20th century. He also was given favor among Catholics and to a limited extent among Orthodox believers, but he was himself a Protestant. And so, I'm just very grateful for those times I had with him. I wish I had more. I wish I'd been paying more attention when I had those times. Sometimes you don't know what you've got until it's gone, to quote Joni Mitchell. But anyway, that was kind of the early part of my adult life.
Yeah. Go, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to ask, you referenced a few times how you were in the corporate world and working in the business context, and then you sort of transitioned or moved into a different phase of life. Can you talk a little bit about what that transition was like for you and what that turn meant for you? What brought you to leave that world and start afresh?
Well, yeah, I can certainly talk about it. My pathway was not linear. Let's start with that as a stipulated point. I had a very supernatural, I don't know if I was converted or brought back fully to the Lord. I'm not really sure, because when I was a boy, I was certainly introduced to the faith by my grandparents, and I would have said I was a believer. I certainly acknowledged Christian doctrine and, held to the tenets of the faith. But I would say my heart wasn't necessarily inflamed or warmed, to quote John Wesley. And when I was 18, I had a dramatic supernatural experience with God on my front porch. And I either fully and really got converted. It's almost like the software had been put in the computer, but now the machine got booted up. Or I really was a believer, but I wasn't a particularly ardent one, and I now became ardent. People have asked me, well, which one is it? Were you or weren't you a Christian? I'm like, well, I would have said I was a Christian. So if you give me the benefit of the doubt, then yeah, I was a Christian. But on the other hand, my life after that time at age 18 was very different. So, you can draw your own conclusions. But anyway, I went off to Princeton as a fired up, impassioned believer. And while I was there, I got baptized in the Holy Spirit, or filled with the Holy Spirit, as people say. And then my sophomore year, I had another very supernatural experience. I woke one morning. It was October. I don't know the date anymore, but it was October. There was a hard frost. The leaves were changing, and I was having an open vision. And for those who don't know that language, there are some visions that are more internal, but there are some visions that are like you see them with your eyes wide open. And for 3 days, I had this open vision, and it didn't leave. And in the vision, I saw fiery letters that said seminary. The letters were about, you can see me on screen, but maybe our viewers can't or listeners can't. But they were, about like so. So that would be from, the top of my head to my belly. So more than maybe 18 inches high. And they were about 3 inches thick, and they were on fire. And I just saw this word, seminary. And everywhere I went, I saw that. I mean, if I was in class at a lecture, I'd be looking at the professor lecturing and writing things on the board. When I did that, I could see the word. If I closed my eyes, I could see the word. If I was eating, I could see it, superimposed on my food. It was every single place my eyes turned, every place I looked, I could see this seminary, seminary, seminary. So that was rather interesting. And I concluded from that God wanted me to go to seminary. But I'm a very, very, deep thinker and spiritual. But, even with that, I didn't really want to go. I wanted to go I wanted to go into business because I'd grown up, relatively poor. I mean, we weren't poor, but we didn't have much. My mother was a nurse. My father had died young, and we didn't come from money. And I didn't want my kids to grow up the way I grew up. And so I really wanted a career in business. So in response to as Paul said, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. In response to that, I withdrew from the engineering school at Princeton, where I was studying solid state physics and quantum mechanics. And I went after philosophy and history of religion. And the reason I did that was because I started ordering seminary catalogs. You couldn't just go online in those days, didn't exist. And as I was reading these catalogs, it was pretty clear that engineering was not the way to get into seminary. I needed to have something that was more somehow liberal artsy. Mm-hmm. And I was, because of my own experiences, these supernatural experiences, both at age 18 and then this one in the fall of 79, I was really interested in various religious philosophies and systems and the way people thought about it. And so the history and philosophy of religion was just a logical thing for me to go after. And I want to be clear, this wasn't Bible training. This was studying the sociology of religion. It was studying the anthropology of religion. It was studying how did Buddhism develop? How did Hinduism develop? And what are these various thought systems? We studied animism. I mean, it was very broad-based. And in looking back on it, I can see that it was one of those sovereign foundation things. It was amazing that God had dropped me into one of the finest programs in the world, and it was accessible to me. But anyway, that's how I finished out my time at Princeton. And then because I now knew what I needed to do to go to seminary, I got a job on Wall Street. And I started working it's now part of Deutsche Bank, but I was working for Bankers Trust as a trader of money market securities and foreign exchange. And that was an eye-opening experience. And I mean, it was good while it was. But during that time, one of the women in my church approached me with a bag filled with cassette tapes and other ancient technology. And she said, I bought these and I finished listening to them, and I was praying this morning, and I felt like the Lord wanted me to give these to you. So I took them, and I had another ancient technology, a Sony Walkman, and I started putting the cassette tapes in the Sony Walkman and listening to them on my little earphones. And these just inflamed me. These were teachings from none other than John Wesley. And he talked about healing and the supernatural and driving out demons and angels visiting and getting words of knowledge and prophetic things. He talked about all this like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I thought, well, if this is true, I mean, I got to have this. So I took a few days off work and I went home to California. And as it turned out, his church was very close to where I'd grown up. And I took my mother there with me. And when we walked into the church, I realized, oh, this is the church I visited with some of my friends in high school. I hadn't connected the dots. And again, in high school, meaning before that epic day on my front porch where I'd had this first encounter with God. And that night, my mother had a severe problem in her mouth. She had these sores that had broken out all over her gums and her tongue, very painful. And she was drooling continuously, and she was holding a rag over her mouth because it hurt so much that she was just drooling from the pain. So anyway, we went to this service. It was an amazing service. All I remember is the worship was unbelievably rich. And John preached a sermon that made a lot of sense to me. And then they had what they called back room time. And so anyone who needed prayer, go in the back room. So off we go, my mom and I, into the back room. And these two women walked up to pray for her. And then presently Lonnie Frisbee came over. He's a famous figure in kind of latter 20th century church history as well. But he came over, and so, they prayed on my mom, and I don't remember if it was 30 seconds or 45 or maybe all was 60. But what I do remember very clearly is that in a very short space of time, like I've just described, possibly up to 1 minute, the drooling quit, and these sores that were about, the size of a raisin and dark black that were all over her tongue and the roof of her mouth, they just vanished, and they were gone. And my mother was healed in front of my eyes. And I literally saw these sores vanish. I mean, they disappeared. There's no other way to say it. And I know a lot of people go, "You're out of your mind, Ken." Well, no, I'm not. This is what happened. And so, that kind of cemented it. And I was like, man, if this is the deal, I got to have this. This is the Christianity that I read about in the Bible. And so I went back to New York, resume work on the trading desk, but my heart was no longer there. My heart was away. And so it was very shortly after that I left Bankers Trust. I returned to California, but not wanting to go to seminary. I just did not want to be in the ministry. I got another job in California in financial services, this time with an merger arbitrage trading house, trading stocks that were subject to takeover. And so I worked there, and I started going to Fuller Seminary in the evenings because of the way they structured their program. I could do that. So I worked from 5 to 3, and then I had class from 5 to 7 and 7 to 9. And then I'd drive home. So I thought I was obeying God with my, going to seminary. I took John Wimber's class that at the time was called MC 510. It doesn't exist anymore, but in those years, it was making quite an impact across Christendom, because he was teaching on supernatural stuff and doing it in the classroom, and it was actually happening. And so I took that class, and then subsequent to that, I was asked to be a TA, a teaching assistant. And somewhere in the midst of all that, one day I was driving to Fuller to go to class for my, 5 to 7, 7 to 9. And I was driving up the 57 freeway in Southern California. Anyone who knows Southern California would know that freeway. And I was kind of complaining to the Lord about the things that I saw going on at school. Hang on just a second. I'm getting an incoming call. There we go. I was complaining to the Lord about things that I saw going on at the seminary and that were, kind of making me crazy. So we're in the middle of a heated conversation, God and I, as I'm driving along. And again, many people will think I'm out of my mind, but this literally, really, for sure happened. I hope I'm coming across credibly. A cloud filled the car. And God spoke to me audibly, and he said, "I did not send you back to California to work in financial services. I sent you here to go to seminary. Now do what I told you to do in the vision, quit your job and go to seminary." So I resigned that week, which wasn't a popular thing in the company. And I enrolled full-time at Fuller, and I finished out my seminary studies. And in the midst of all that, I was hired on by John. It started as an internship, but it became a full-time thing. And as I say, I worked for him full-time for 6 years on the front end and then 5 more on the back end. That was kind of how I got into all this. There were supernatural events along the line. There were what today we call divine appointments or God setups or chance meetings, some people would say, that clearly had intentionality and purpose. And that's kind of where it began. I don't know what more. I mean, I could go on longer, but I think I've gone long enough to saying all that. So I'll just stop there and let you ask another question.
Yeah, I love, so those who may be skeptical about all this, when I first met Ken, he did a talk about healing and going through a 5-mile process of how to pray for healing like Jesus prayed in the Bible. And when I first heard you, Ken, I was super skeptical, and I was freaking out that I brought a crazy televangelist into my church building. And I was just waiting for like you laying on hands and people just dropping, and then you asking for money at the end of the thing. And I was just nervous and scared. But what I love about your teaching is that you mentioned John Wesley earlier, but I feel like you do a really good job of that Wesleyan quadrant of making sure you anchor it in scripture, reason, tradition, and also you back up what you say with the prayer time. So that really was really humbling to see. And then I remember you called me up to pray for someone for healing, and I was half skeptical, half okay. I believe in the Bible, but I don't know. And I remember this nurse came up. She was like a nurse, which also is important too, because I think people always react negatively that if you pray for healing, that means you're anti-medicine, anti-Western medicine. That's not the case. Just to make that clear, I think it's important to confirm that. So a nurse who practices came up for prayer. I continued to pray after you got a word for her, and she began to shake. Obviously, the Spirit of God was moving, but I was still skeptical. But then 2 months later, I'm walking down 3rd Avenue and 34th Street. I'm going to 7-Eleven, I remember. And there's this woman honking her horn at me, telling the person next to her, "That's the pastor who prayed for me. That's the pastor who prayed for me." So I go up to her in front of the window, and I was like, "Did you get better?" And she looked at me in complete disbelief, like, "What?" So she got better, and that began to help me trust that, okay, God is still true to his word. God could still heal. And I've seen many testimonies after that, even on 34th Street, Miracle on 34th Street in New York, but also in Armenia and elsewhere where we've done ministry together. And it's always a blast to see God still do these things that are mentioned in the Bible. And part of what you do now, Ken, is you equip the church and church leaders to pursue healing, the prophetic, and you just recently launched an online school, correct?
That's correct. It's called Orbis School of Ministry, and the website is Orbis, Orbis, orbissm.com. The SM is for School of Ministry. So orbissm.com is the kind of landing page. We started with a 3-part course on healing, physical healing, healing of the body. And then right now we're in the middle of courses on prophecy. We're actually just about to start registration for the Prophecy 102 class. And if people want to sign up, there's time to do that. They can sign up there at orbissm.com. Next year, we'll have courses on inner healing and deliverance. And we have some other things planned going forward from there, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But anyway, that's the school, and people seem to be loving it. And the thing that I'm very excited about is that people are actually being activated. I mean, they may not have ever seen anyone healed, or they may have never given any kind of a prophetic word that was legit, that came to pass or had any teeth to it. And, I'm not talking about the kind of prophetic words that harangue people. I'm talking about words that really speak the heart of God for a situation where God's mind is on exhibit, and where people are, they're literally having the secrets of their heart told to them. And, we have people in our prophecy class who've never had anything like that. They may have seen it happen, or maybe not. Maybe they've never been around it at all on any level. And yet they're engaged with it now. And they're like, wow, this is great. This actually works. And so, now we have people that are healing sick people. We have people that are prophesying with great effectiveness. And I know what'll happen when we do the inner healing and the deliverance material. We will have people who get activated in those areas. And so I'm super encouraged by that, because I really believe that God always intended, I mean, literally, our Father always intended for those who follow him to walk in these things. In the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark, it says, "These signs will accompany those who believe." And 2 of them that are named, they will cast out demons, and they will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. And we've seen many, many people set free of evil spirits. We've seen many, many people healed of physical maladies of various kinds. And, to me, this is carrying out the Great Commission, which most people who know the Great Commission don't go first to Mark 16. Part of it is they're just not comfortable with that exact language I quoted. Casting out demons and healing the sick. Are you kidding me? And then it says, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, and he who does not believe will be condemned. So, there's a clear call to discipleship, to line up behind and to walk the Jesus walk. But, when we look at the other version of the Great Commission, the one that is so commonly quoted in standard churches, it's found in Matthew 28. And at the very last two verses of Matthew 28, it says, go into all the world, preach the gospel, and baptize those who believe in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So we see the common language of baptism between the Mark story and the Matthew story. But then it goes on and it says, teach them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always to the end of the age. Well, that language of teach them to observe all that I've commanded you, I think in many cases that's been severely dumbed down to mean, teach them to pass out bulletins as ushers in the church. I don't think there's anything wrong with ushers, but I don't see anywhere in the Gospels that Jesus was teaching his disciples to pass out bulletins. Or maybe, teach Sunday school or work in the parking lot and help people park their cars. And again, nothing wrong with any of these things. I think Sunday school is an important part of the training and discipling of young believers, and for that matter, older ones. We know adult ed is an important part of training people who are midlife and who need to know their faith better. And, parking cars, this is an important thing in a church that may have a lot of people coming. I would classify that in the ministry of helps. It's not necessarily supernatural, but these things matter. But none of these things are mentioned in the Gospels, not a single one. What is mentioned in the Gospels is when Jesus commissioned his disciples, and it says this in Matthew, right? We're talking about the ending of Matthew.
Not the questionable one in Mark, yeah.
Yeah. In Matthew, Jesus sends out his 12 disciples. And when he sends them out, he gives them this commission. He says, go declare the kingdom of heaven. And as you declare the kingdom of heaven, heal the sick, raise the dead, that'll stretch you, cleanse lepers, and drive out demons. You've received freely, give freely. And so that is what he told them to do. So when he says, teach them to observe all that I've commanded you, what he was really saying is, when you make people into converts, teach them to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and drive out demons. I don't think we've commonly read that passage that way, but it's an unmistakable conclusion. And then he goes on and he says something really interesting. He says, and lo, I am with you always to the end of the age. Well, in other words, if you will follow this, I will accompany you. If you don't follow this, not as clear. And so we've tended to take the language of I'm with you always to the end of the age, and we've tended to make it mean something kind of like this. When the storms of life encompass me and life is hard, Jesus is with me as I tread the lonely and drudge path that I must walk. And he comforts me and lifts up my soul. Well, that might be right. I'm not going to say it isn't true, because I think the Lord does encourage us in dark times. But it's a far bigger mandate than just, Jesus will comfort me and encourage me. It's what he's saying is, I will be right beside you doing the things that I always did in the days of my earthly ministry as you go and train other people to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and drive out demons. And look, that's what the word lo means. It's kind of old-fashioned English, but look, pay attention. If you'll do this, I will be with you to the end of the age. And so a lot of people have been told, these things no longer happen, or they shouldn't happen. And it's a different dispensation. And, it all stopped when the Bible was completed, or when the last apostle died. There's all these different theories about it. But Jesus says to the end of the age, to the end of the age, he will go with his followers and help them in the journey to do the things that he did. And so the first apostles, who are obviously now dead, were to train the next generation of believers that they, converted and raised up to serve Jesus Christ. And then those people would in turn take that mandate and do the next generation, and then the next one, and then the next one. And you just go down through the long centuries and you come to the modern period. And so I believe what God is doing is reawakening all of these things in his church. so that the church looks like the church was always supposed to look. It's not boring. It's not dead. It's not just stuffy. May or may not have candles, may or may not have pews. But the heart and soul of what's going on is this living dynamic of the Spirit of God.
That's great, Ken. I feel like, just to wrap things up here, any sort of advice for people who may be like a second career, feeling this nudge to go into ministry, any sort of advice towards them, or if anyone is listening to this now and wants to jump into ministry, any sort of insights there, Ken?
John Wimber always said, if you can do anything else, go do it. But if it keeps coming back to you to be in ministry, then you better honor that, because God is calling you. Now, you may have supernatural experiences like I did, open visions and whatnot, or maybe not. Sometimes you just have this pull that you can't really throw off, and you might want to, but you can't really get rid of it. If you feel that, I would say lean into it. Because if you'll lean into it, don't do what I did. I resisted God for many years, and you asked me about how I transitioned out of my corporate career, and I didn't really answer that, but I'll just say it was after more than 20 years of resisting all of that. And you might say, how could you possibly do that when it was so clear? But I did. I'm not proud of it. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying you being the generic you, anyone who may be listening to this, but it's what I did. And, there was often times of frustration, deep discontent, feeling like I was a pretender in all that I was doing. I finally just yielded to it. And with that, God began to open amazing doors. And I have the kinds of stories that I now have to tell. I think God always wanted that for me. And so, if you feel God nudging you, speaking to you, again, it doesn't need to be as supernatural and obvious. Maybe I needed it that obviously because I was that stubborn and God had to, hammer on my thick head. But if you feel that, I would say go with it, because in the end, if you seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, then everything you need will be added to you. That's what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:33. I don't think we take that one seriously enough either. I think a lot of times people say, well, that's just nice sentiments. No, if you seek the kingdom first and make it your number one priority, if you make God's priorities your priorities, then God will make his priorities your priorities, and he will take care of you. He will provision you for the journey. And with that, you may need some training. You could get the hands-on practical training that we offer through the Orbis school. You might feel called to go to a seminary. If you do, maybe try Alliance Theological Seminary in New York City, where you went hike, or United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, where I'm getting my doctorate. There are some other seminaries. I went to Fuller Seminary. There's some things going on there that I'm not sure what to think of them. So I'm not sure if I want to recommend them or not. I need to do more research, but anyway, it is where I went. And at one time it was a great seminary. And there are some others that are worthwhile, but I don't think in the whole of the US, I don't think if I was really being generous, I don't think there'd be 10 seminaries that I myself would feel comfortable recommending. So I would say be choosy about where you go, so you won't find that the faith you have somehow gets squelched in the midst of the academia and possibly the outright unbelief.
There's a running joke of calling a seminary cemetery for a reason.
It's exactly correct.
Hilarious. Ken, thank you so much for being on the conversation today. We appreciate you so much, and for taking time out of your day. We'll put a little link in the description here below, but orbissm.com is the link to the school, right?
That's it.
Yep.
And my website, general website, is orbisministries.org. Two different websites, orbisministries.org.
Perfect. So we'll put links down in the bottom there. If anyone would like to click, you can just click the virtual down there as I point to it here on the screen. And Ken, thank you so much for being here today. God bless you, and we appreciate your ministry. And everybody out there, have a fantastic week. We're glad you joined us for this coffee hour. God bless, and we'll connect with you again soon.